One thing we haven't really talked about yet is the cross-section drawing. Cross-sections are like taking a giant knife and slicing through a cake. It shows all the inside structures and components that you may not see behind the scenes. So a reception desk, for instance, when you're looking at a cross-section of it, it shows you how the desk is actually put together. Now you may be looking at this particular cross-section going, I don't know what's going on. There's a lot of parts and pieces. Well, I can tell you that reading cross-sections is something that you're going to need to get good at if you're going to be designing millwork pieces. So I will point out a couple things to help you understand this drawing, and I'm also going to use a 3D model I've built in SketchUp simultaneously to help us illustrate the 2D drawing. So we're going to start at the very bottom, and there you can see that there's actually a 2x4 piece of wood. In the actual 2D drawing, you see the side of the wood, but over in the SketchUp model, you see it laying kind of across the floor. Large bolts are going to be drilled into this 2x4, thus attaching it to the floor securely. So we obviously wouldn't want this reception desk to topple over if it was accidentally bumped. It is a little bit of an awkward shape, and bumping into desks are something that happens a lot. So we want to make sure that it's firmly and securely attached to the floor. A structure similar to the wall studs is built on top of the 2x4. So here in the 2D, you can kind of see there's little lines coming and extending up from the actual stud on the bottom, and that's representing these vertical pieces here in the 3D model. This structure is also made of 2x4s, which are nailed into the bottom 2x4, giving it what I call a structured height. The idea is that the accessible desktop or the countertop of the main desk will sit on top of and be supported by these studs. So you can kind of see that here where the countertop is actually laying across right here, and then I'm going to come over here so that you can kind of see how that countertop is laying on those studs. So making sure all of your pieces have the right support is a really important factor in millwork for safety and function. The next important thing is to consider the thickness of materials so that you know what size things are supposed to be cut to. So if the top of the desk is supposed to be 30 inches high, you have to do some math to figure in the thickness of the countertop in order to know what size those vertical 2x4s are supposed to be cut at. Are you guys following this okay so far? If not, let the instructor know at any time so they can pause the video and clear up any confusion you might be having. It's really important to grasp these concepts. Once that vertical structure is in place, we attach a steel tube to those vertical studs. And let me get the picture back. That is what this L-shaped looking thing is right here. And over here in the model, that is what these silver looking things are right here. Steel tubes are incredibly strong and are typically hollow 2x2 metal pieces. There are small holes along the sides of the tube, even though I don't show it in the 3D version. I do show that here in the 2D version. Those small holes are used to actually attach the tube to the vertical studs, usually with a bolt of some kind. That forms a secure bond to the vertical structure of the tube, and then the tube is actually bent or welded into an L shape, and the top of that L is designed to help support the depth of the desk countertop. So without those support pieces, the desk countertop would likely break with any amount of weight placed on it. So you can see here in the 3D model how it's supporting the length or depth of that countertop. Usually you want these support tubes to support the outer edges of the countertop as well as the middle. So you can see here on my desk model, I've got the tubes on the outsides, so here and here, and then I also have a couple kind of towards the middle, and that's what's giving this countertop some pretty good support. The next thing that's added is going to be the structure that supports the 42-inch high transaction countertop. So I'm going to come over here and we're going to switch focus, and I'm actually going to flip this around a little bit. So with the magic of video editing, here we go. La! So beautiful. All right, so here's the similar structure that was made for the regular accessible height countertop, and it's just placed above, and it's a little bit taller for the transaction. Now you're going to see over here that I'm actually going to put some decorative pieces underneath so that we have like a floating countertop kind of look, but for right now just look at the structure that's made here. There are a lot of ways to secure these two structures together, and right here I'm kind of demonstrating how a flat piece of metal can be placed here and drilled into both sets. I'm sure there's also probably some construction adhesive used in between to keep it tightly and securely bonded together, but you can also see that the structure is starting to also sit on top of the baseboards right here. Once your framework is solid, the next step is to add the wood panels to hide the stud structures underneath and give it its pretty look. So let me open up the cross section, and you can see that panel is located on all of the sides, like underneath, down, here underneath, up on top. You can see it's right next to the stud structure in the cross section. So coming over to my model, let's look at this guy over here, and you can see I've got panels on the sides. I even have a little privacy panel for the workers and their legs. Not everybody likes their legs to be visible. And you can see I've got panels on top, panels underneath. We're looking pretty good there, except for these really ugly butt joints I have here. So this is where joints comes in really handy for you to understand how to work with them. It's kind of like you have to put on a carpenter hat and look at what other joints might be better to use in this situation. Miter joints, rabbet joints, maybe even data joints might come in handy for these situations. So with reception desks, you really don't want to see the edges of plywood anywhere. Remember how rough and ugly the edges of plywood looks? Reception desks should look as high quality as it possibly can, so therefore the seamless edge look is what you should go for. So don't do what I did. I did this to show you that you have to think about what piece goes on top of the other. So for instance, this side sits in between the two main panels of the front and the back because I didn't want to see the edge on the front. I'd rather see the edge on the side. But again, there's probably some better methods of joining these pieces together. If you did do these butt joints, you could add a layer of veneer or laminate to the panel surfaces, but honestly that takes a lot more time. It takes money, it takes energy to cover things like that. There's no right or wrong way, but maybe there are smarter ways to piece panels together. So a lot of times this is where a carpenter will actually come in and give his expertise on how these edges should be handled to make it look seamless. So don't be afraid to ask them for help or expertise. Eventually, you won't need to ask, you're just going to know. The last step is putting on the finishing touches like the decorative materials or the panels. As you can see over here, if I can get SketchUp to work, there we go. So here's the decorative panels, here's the decorative metal pieces that are going to be helping the countertop to float. Putting in the grommet holes. I even added the pencil drawer desk so you can kind of see under here how it's fit in between the two steel tubes right here. And then this is where like your computer cords go down into, so you can actually see towards the bottom there. So it's putting on all the finishing touches. And looking over here at the cross section, you can see that there is actually an extra panel, like an extra 1/2 inch thick panel that was added to the front of this desk with some metal pieces in between the two seams. So there's lots of different ways to decorate your reception desks, and that's usually where a lot of the design and aesthetics come into play. So you can see the cross section is actually one of the most important parts of millwork. It really does show how something's constructed and put together, and you just have to know how to read them in order to get the most information out of them. So cross sections help you think about what parts and pieces are needed in order to create the project. Do you need hardwood? Like, where's hardwood going? Where's plywood going? What thicknesses are those materials? How do you attach them to each other? How do I make sure I'm giving enough support and keeping this object safe to use? A cross section will tell you most of this. Adding the 2D drawings and the 3D model will tell you everything you need to know about building millwork pieces. You guys are just in the beginning stages, and it's going to take practice to really be able to master this, but I hope that you are starting to see how the cross section tells us how things are actually going to be built.